This is a skin that no one can guess what kind of skin it is, but if someone guesses correctly, that person will marry the king's only princess and become the country's only emperor's son-in-law. Unexpectedly, the confident smile on the king's face instantly froze, and the princess who was standing beside him panicked. And just now, the campaigner, Mr. Rowless, sniffed the skin and told the king that it was the skin of a flea. When he heard the answer, the king was dumbfounded, but the question was, how could a flea have such a big skin? It turned out that the princess had sung 108 songs at a banquet earlier. The king's ears were about to go bankrupt when a flea crawled out of his hand. The king was instantly interested, and in no time he was playing with the flea. As soon as the princess finished her 109th song, the king couldn't sit still and gave a perfunctory applause, then rode off with his legs numb from sitting. The king must have watched too many TV dramas and returned to his chambers to cut his finger and feed the flea with his own blood. He was afraid that it would catch a cold, so he prepared a luxurious presidential suite for the flea. Then the king took a magnifying glass bigger than his head and stared at the flea. The next day, the king was worried that his favorite pet would be bored, so he made him a BMW overnight. Even though there was an urgent letter he had to sign, he had no time to concentrate on his pet. Half a month passed, and the king fed the flea steak every day, so much so that he could now jump up and bite the king's knee. But on this day the princess was of marriageable age, and the king asked his daughter at dinner what kind of husband you want. The princess said she didn't want much, and then she was heard to say brave, strong, handsome, wise, funny and considerate. The king's CPU was burned and he thought for a long time and then told his daughter to eat first. The food would get cold, but unexpectedly at night, the sleeping royal physician was suddenly woken up. He rushed to the king's bedchamber thinking that the king was dying, but the king said he was fine but his favorite was sick. When he saw his favorite, he was so frightened that he backed away, a sight he could brag about for the rest of his life. But he was a healer, so he went to see him. But before he could find out what was wrong, the flea died. Heartbroken, the king suddenly came up with the idea of choosing his daughter's husband from flea skins. However, the only person who guessed the correct answer was a boy with no eyebrows. The princess ran out of the house in a panic. The man pinched the skin, which was bigger than his face. Then he went up and touched it and even plucked a hair. But the next moment, the man's eyes glazed over and he knew the answer and said it was a sow's skin. But the king was very happy and said it wasn't. Then another man came in, and looking at this bearded man in black, the princess next to the king looked a little unhappy, because the king was choosing a husband for her, in order not to be a superficial person. The king made a question, who can guess what kind of skin he hanged out? Then who can become the only emperor's son-in-law of his country? Then the bearded man walked steadily and took out a magnifying glass that could see everything. This professional gesture scared the princess to death. The king looked at the bearded man with admiration, but then he gave an unheard of answer, saying that this was the real and unique god of the woods. The king suddenly stopped when he heard this answer, and the princess panicked when she heard this specialized word. But soon the king said, "No, it's not." The princess let out a long breath of relief. She had been mistaken. Then another man came up to the king, and he looked at his daughter. The princess smiled at the corners of her mouth to show her satisfaction. Looking at his courteous manner, the princess could not help but ask her father what kind of skin it was so that she could give her answer to the prince. But the king was not fooled and refused his daughter's request and told her that no one would be able to guess. The prince quickly observed the skin and said it was the skin of a giant manatee. The princess was delighted, and